Okie dokie. All right, back again here. My fiance called me, so this will be the real steak and wine video here. I'll post humorously and just name that last video Philly. So going back to the Golden State Warriors, 19 million under the tax, 27 million under the first apron, 9 players under contract, a lot of cap holds. Main player is Kristaps Porzingis. This Yaxel guy is the guy they took at 11. Pat Spencer, Quentin Post, both cap holds. Should be fairly cheap. And then just a laundry list of names here because they have been an over the salary cap team for a long time. So they have a decade plus of cap holds here. So Golden State has been rumored as a potential LeBron team. They wanted to get in on Giannis. That is never really realistic. And the problem with having Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry is they're pretty hamstrung here. The other problem here is Moses Moody, I believe, tore his ACL. He had some sort of gruesome injury. It may not have been an ACL. But he's probably out for the whole year. He's their 4th highest contract, which may have been an overpay before that injury at 12.5. So you just kind of look at this roster. They only got 9 guys under roster. DeAnthony Melton probably is going to opt out of this, which would put them at 8. And there's very little positive value here. You remove kind of like the history and legacy and all that stuff. The obvious move is to trade Steph Curry, but the Warriors aren't going to do that. I don't think anyone blames them for not trading Curry. It's just going to be very hard to build any sort of contender around this team. If you were to sign and trade Porzingis, that hard caps you at the first apron, which you're only 27 away from. You have to roster at least another 5 players. Lyndon Borg will be one of those 5, so you would only need to get 4 more. So you sign him, you bring back Spencer and Post close to the minimum. You could realistically be a first apron team and trade Porzingis and salaries for like a LeBron James in a sign and trade. Who else could they really get? Realistically, that would make sense. That would help this team. It's kind of hard to fathom. If they didn't do a sign and trade, they could use their full mid-level exception. But then you're talking like John Collins-esque players, which aren't going to move the needle either. We look at the trade machine for them and just try to kind of eyeball what could be available for them. They do control a good amount of their future first-round picks. If they wanted to try to trade them, you could try to get like a Trey Murphy kind of player. But I just don't really understand what they could offer other than picks for Trey Murphy. And the Pelicans, they don't have a lot of wiggle room either. So I'm kind of stumped with the Warriors. I really don't understand what the Warriors are going to do. I know they're going to try to do something. It's just, for me, there's not real obvious players. They just have that Jimmy Butler dead money is just so hard for them to overcome. They could try to flip that into something. Like you could, going back to Philly, I didn't think about that. You could flip Paul George for Jimmy Butler, which essentially gets Philly a year out of Jimmy Butler. And the Warriors get a playable player there. How much does that really help? You could even do, instead of Paul George, you could do Embiid. Something like that. And then Embiid is slightly more healthy than Jimmy Butler in theory. And you would have Curry, Draymond, Steph Curry. You probably would want to try to trade Moses Moody, but I don't know that Philly really has a second contract you could deal for him, so that doesn't really work either. So if you're the Warriors, you could explore this. I think this oddly kind of makes sense for both teams. Not that Philly would really want Jimmy Butler back, but you could never bring him back. You could even just buy him out, and you just get out of that Embiid contract. Or you could flip him kind of in that same Zach LaVine kind of model if you're Philly. And if you're the Warriors, you're taking on a terrible Joel Embiid contract, but you're trying to maximize these Steph Curry years, and instead of having a 38 Jimmy Butler coming off an ACL, you get a younger player that probably has a higher ceiling, even though the injury risk is terrible, and you're going to regret it in the later years of that contract. Let's see, who else could potentially be like a Jimmy Butler or a Porzingis sign and trade. It's pretty limited, because even like the Anthony Davis scenario doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You would have to extend Anthony Davis, and then the Wizards want to compete, so you probably would have to pay a first-round pick to overpay Anthony Davis. You could try to dump him for like the Bucks poo-poo platter. That might make some sense, actually. If you did Miles Turner and Kuzma for Jimmy Butler, you would save $9 million, which would be really nice for the Warriors, and you get 2 playable players. And for the Bucks, they get out of those 2 years of Miles Turner. They have to take on about the same amount of money they saved salary dumping Bobby Portis, but it isn't expiring. So you would have Jimmy Butler's money and Tyler Herro's money come off at the end of next season, which would make you a pretty much blank slate. I think that may make some sense too, especially if Golden State would part with a first-round pick or some of these second-round picks that they have. That could make a lot of sense for the Warriors, I think. But those are the kind of desperation Warrior trades I think they have to make. But there's limited options, but maybe because Jimmy Butler isn't expiring, there is something you can actually pull off. Next up is one of the more interesting teams, I think, this offseason in the Atlanta Hawks. Because they have so much apron space, they have a fairly full roster already. And they had the 8th and 23rd pick in this year's draft. It looks like they took Kingston Flemings and then 3.5 Zube Ejiofor, 22-year-old center. Okay. So that would put them at 11 rostered players, 14 rostered players with Aaron Wiggins, who they've already traded for as well. So you're looking at a pretty full roster. And it would really just be kind of trades that they would be looking to make. Buddy Hield is mostly non-guaranteed. They could waive him and create that roster spot, give them another $6 million in savings, which should open up the full mid-level exception for them. They have Nkongwu as their starting center. They just drafted that rookie, but it was in the 20s. So maybe you could be in the market for a third center with that mid-level exception. You could potentially bring John Collins back. You could sign Yusuf Nurkic as like a stopgap center. Maybe make an offer for like a Nick Richards or a Mark Williams, Andre Drummond, Sandro Mamukalevsky from Toronto. You could probably get DeAndre Ayton off the Lakers for basically nothing. So there are interesting options if you wanted to go that route. Wing is a little tougher to pull off. We talked about wing with the Spurs. You're really just kind of looking at Harrison Barnes, or you're squinting and talking yourself into like OG Abaji, Bogdan Bogdanovic. This is supposed to be a team option, I think, on my internal sheet here. Not that I'm sharing that. Quentin Grimes, Fontecchio. Yeah, it's not much in terms of wings. You could go for one more guard. You are a little bit guard heavy. but you don't have a traditional point guard, which I think is what they brought Gabe Vincent in for last year. There's not really a traditional point guard per se in the mid-level range, but you could get Anthony Simons, Colin Sexton, Kobe White. Jose Alvarado, I guess, is more of a traditional, but not one you could really start. But I think using that mid-level is probably the most realistic path for Atlanta, whether it's a free agent or a player that they acquire into it. You could also try to dump Zachary Richeche as he fell out of the rotation last year. Cody Kesper, Buddy Hield, Kuminga you haven't signed the extension for. So they do have a pretty fluid situation here. So let's look at them as a potential like Trey Murphy team, for example. They could trade Kispert and Richeche, and I guess they could throw Buddy Hield in there too. To New Orleans, take back Trey Murphy, and they could take back Kevon Looney, who I don't think the Pelicans have a whole lot of interest in. That was supposed to be like this. Why are they both taking on money? And you could probably take on this Jordan Hawkins contract just to save them money. Not quite. Alright, that money's a little too funny. But you're not in risk of being a first apron team. So you could just say, hey, take Tony Bradley. Oh, Jock Lyndell is also a free agent for them. Then Atlanta could say, hey, here's that's probably a little too valuable. Most favorable of Atlanta, at least favorable of Cleveland and Utah, other than the other to Cleveland. So they could trade this pick to New Orleans for Trey Murphy. Maybe you would have to include another one. So let's just give New Orleans their pick back in 27, just to make it clean here. So they could do this Trey Murphy trade here, where they take Trey Murphy, they get Kevon Looney to kind of replace Jock Landale as their backup veteran center. They have the tax of just taking on Jordan Hawkins' contract because the Pelicans don't want it. The Pelicans get the less of Milwaukee, New Orleans 2027 pick. So they would go back to owning their own pick and Milwaukee's pick in 2027. They get to take a flyer on Richeche, who was the number 1 overall pick a couple years ago. They have to take on Cody Kespert's contract, who's not great, but probably serviceable. You know, he's at least playable. Buddy Hield is really a like $3 million contract, with the rest of that is non-guaranteed. So they could either roster him at $9 million or just waive him and use those additional savings elsewhere. And then just to make the money work, Atlanta had to do a sign and trade. I picked Tony Bradley. This would be a 3-year contract where only the first year is guaranteed, and then the Pelicans would just waive that because they're getting that $2 million savings, even with that sign and trade player that they have to just waive. That may not be enough. They maybe would need to throw in probably not another first, but maybe a couple seconds. They wanted to do that Trey Murphy sort of move. They could also maybe go after like Aldama on Memphis, which I think Memphis would be willing to part with. Other options for them. Sacramento doesn't have anything all that interesting. I wonder if you could get an asset for Portland. You gave up Richeche and Kesper for Jeremy Grant. Probably not. Yeah, Atlanta has a lot of options. I'm just not entirely clear on options. I'm not all that creative here. So let's just move on to the next team. I don't think I necessarily did Atlanta that much justice here. Portland is a situation similar to Atlanta. They didn't have the success this year that Atlanta did, but relatively a same cap situation here. 30 million in tax base, 38 million under the apron, 12 players under contract. Notable free agent is Time Lord Robert Williams III. No one else really all that noticeable or notable. Caleb Love got some playing time for them this year. I think they like Thibault. Thibault's probably a minimum player at this point. You can bring both those guys back. You'd be at 14, and you just have plenty of space. So they seem like a prime candidate for a trade. Even if you bring Robert Williams back for like $20 million a year, you're still clear of the tax. The Drew Holiday contract is fairly tradable. Jeremy Grant is a negative asset, but I think it would be movable. You kind of have a glut at guard with Drew Holiday, Shaden Sharp, Scoot Henderson, and Dame, with Dame being back this year. Two of those guys are 36, so I don't know that you necessarily would want to trade the younger players, but you could afford to trade, like the Giannis rumor was Grant and Shaden Sharp plus Milwaukee's picks for Giannis. I think you could afford to do something in that vein because you have the three other guards. Giannis is now off the table. But could you maybe do that same package for Jaylen Brown? That's been rumored lately. That would be interesting. And then you'd probably start Dame, Jaylen Brown, Kumara, Klingon, Abdia, which is pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting player starting lineup, and I think that kind of fits Jaylen Brown wanting to be the guy on a team. I think he would be better than Abdia in that case. It might kind of still feel like Dame's team since it's his franchise, but obviously he's not the player he once was. And I think that would make a lot of sense for Portland because Portland is kind of in this place where they're kind of in the middle, and I think they want to take that step forward, which would mean a trade. Let's pull up the trade machine, make sure my screen's still working here. You kind of are getting the cutoff here, but one screen, we're going to make it work. Who else could they potentially go after? They could go after like a Zion. That could be interesting. I just don't know that you'd want like Kamara and Zion and Klingon all on the same team. You could go after Durant. I think Durant is a pretty interesting option for them. Let's try that option here. So if they did Jeremy Grant and Shaden Sharp for Durant, you'd have to get a little bit more money from Houston. Houston has some tradable contracts. They could give you either Dorian Finney-Smith's expiring. Steven Adams has 2 more years on that. You probably wouldn't want that. So let's go with Dorian Finney-Smith here. You see the Rockets would save a little bit of money here. Shaden Sharp could kind of step in as that other scoring guard that you need. Jeremy Grant is a much lesser version of Kevin Durant, but I think he could give you 75% of Kevin Durant. So you're increasing your scoring. You're really not hurting your defense all that much either because you're not really trading any of the prime defenders on this team. If you're Houston, you would probably want a little bit more savings, which you could make work as well because you could just say, hey, you have to also take Clint Capella back in this trade. And then you're saving $10 million flat. If you're Houston, that gives you the money to probably bring back Tari Eason and be around the first apron. I still think that would make sense for the Trailblazers. The Blazers would probably have to also throw in a first-round pick. But you have a decent mix here. So you could throw in like this Orlando 2028 first. That's probably enough for this package because you're taking back some bad money. Durant is a year older. Kind of tanked his market there. And then if you're the Blazers, you'd still have Scoot, Drew Holiday, Durant, Kamara, and Klingon. It would be a little harder to bring back Rob Williams in this scenario, but you still could, because you're not really married to DFS or Clopella. But you're kind of cashing in that Shaden Sharp chip to improve the roster here in the short term. Another option here. Nothing else too tasty. I think those would kind of be the two I would target if I'm Portland, is Jaylen Brown and Durant. Miami, we kind of touched on earlier tonight. The Clippers are a weird situation a bit here. They're kind of stuck in this no man's land. They were able to get Garland, which I thought was a nice addition for them. Bogdanovich is a team option, so they can just wipe him away, along with Brook Lopez, Batum. Chris Dunn is non-guaranteed. I think they would keep him because he's at a fairly reasonable contract. Benedict Mathurin is their main free agent. They drafted Keaton Wagler, 5th overall. They do have John Collins cap or bird rights. John Collins is kind of one of those interesting middle of the road players that I don't think you're really kicking yourself if you keep him or if you let him walk. Sorry, my nose gets so itchy when I make these videos. I don't know why. I scratch it once and then I have to scratch it the whole time. So you are almost $50 million under the first apron, so you don't really have to worry about first apron penalties. You could do sign and trades. You just don't have a lot of assets to trade is the problem. You have plenty of salaries to trade. If you wanted to take back a toxic player like an Embiid, Paul George, Zach LaVine, you can make it happen. It's just a matter of what's the real upside in doing that if you're the Clippers. I do think the Clippers will try to do something. I don't think Steve Ballmer has any interest in not being a playoff team. It's just they're very far away and they don't have any real assets to make anything happen. But I don't have a good feel for them. That's part of the reason these teams are at the end of my videos here. And then finally we have Charlotte. Charlotte is my favorite Rudy Gobert trade team, although the draft is now passed. So that's tricky, but Miles Bridges, Josh Green, Grant Williams are all on expirings. Saloon was the 8th overall pick 2 or 3 years ago. He probably doesn't have much value. I thought Rob Dillingham would have value as the 8th overall pick 2-3 years ago. But he didn't have any, so that's probably the same situation with Saloon. But if you're one of these teams going nowhere, maybe it's an interesting flyer. Trey Mann's on like a reasonable $8 million. That's a very tradable salary. They're at 13 players. They had the 14th and 18th pick, which they drafted both of those. So they're technically at 15 with Kobe White as a free agent. They can pay Kobe really whatever they want. They're $52 million under the tax. And so Charlotte, what they're going to want to do is find a consolidation trade where you can make the team a little better. Again, that's easier said than done. You could be a Rudy Gobert team, get rim protection. The problem is without the draft assets, you could trade future assets, but I think like for Minnesota, they would want to get a player, not that you would trade LaMelo Ball for Rudy Gobert, but you would want a player kind of in that vein, whether that's Kyrie Irving, Derek White. I don't think they're in on Ja Morant, but you'd almost kind of want a third team with your expirings going to that third team and your draft capital that you're trading for Gobert. Because you could do like Josh Green, Grant, Saloon, Trey Mann, and get to that Gobert salary pretty easily, if not more, without even touching the Miles Bridges, $23 million expiring as well. But you could also trade that. But there's not a whole lot of non-toxic big salary contracts like that improve your team if you're Charlotte. But let's poke around and see what we can find here. So Cleveland, if they wanted to lower their salary, could do like a Jarrett Allen. That could be pretty interesting if you're Charlotte. Orlando, I don't know how interesting Wendell Carter is, but you could get like Wendell Carter. Problem is Orlando would want to do it as a salary dump. Dallas has a lot of interesting veterans that you could potentially shuffle them for. So let's poke around with that. I don't think they would be in on Kyrie, but you could go after like a Daniel Gafford, a PJ Washington. PJ Washington originally from Charlotte, which is kind of funny, so maybe not PJ Washington. So let's do Gafford and Najee Marshall on expiring. You can send Josh Green back to Dallas, and then you would have to trade another $3 million. So let's give them Saloon. I think Dallas is far enough away that could be interesting for them. And then you would want to, maybe you give Dallas just their 27 first-round pick back. And you probably have to throw a little bit more draft capital in there. But if you're Charlotte here, these are the kind of moves I think you would make where you're improving the roster here. You're not mortgaging too much in future assets. Dallas, you're getting two guys that are playable. You make your team worse, but what's really the harm in that? You're building around Cooper Flag. You're starting to reset the window around Cooper Flag. Part of that is getting your draft pick back in 27 because you expect to be in the lottery. Just in the Western Conference, as tough as it is. Maybe you could get this Cleveland pick. This is the least favorable in 29 between Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah. So that's not a huge first-round pick, but it is an extra asset. You get that back as well. And now you're starting to rebuild the treasure chest if you're the Mavericks. Hornets, upgrade the roster slightly. I think they would want to make a bigger splash than that. But that gets them moving in the right direction. Houston is an interesting team for them because Houston may potentially want to move Jabari, Sengun, or Durant. Memphis, I don't think there's really anything there for them. We talked about Rudy. We've done Rudy in other trades when I talked about the Timberwolves ad nauseum. The high-end guys, it's getting kind of harder to see the path for them. So I think we'll call it on Charlotte there, and I think that covers all 30 teams. I believe we talked about everyone. Maybe not Detroit. Detroit, kind of a similar situation as in Atlanta and Charlotte. They do have to re-sign Jalen Duren. Probably re-sign Tobias Harris. That would get to them to $13 million. Even bringing those guys back at market rates, they're probably under the tax. They also had, I believe, the 17th pick this year, not the 21st. They traded up. They don't have the player listed. Oh, Karim Lopez. No, I don't think that's right. So maybe some of the other teams I wasn't right on either. But I did see that Detroit traded up from 21 to 17. So you bring those two back, you sign your rookie. That's 14 players. You're still under the tax. So then what could you do marginally to upgrade from there? They've been rumored about Tyler Hero, which I think makes a lot of sense. Karis LeVert's contract doesn't get you quite there. You would have to attach either Duncan Robinson or Isaiah Stewart. Isaiah Stewart has been rumored in some trades, so could you do like a 3-teamer where Isaiah Stewart goes to a third team and then you get a little bit of draft capital back? Maybe you get like 4 second-round picks, 2 go to Milwaukee, 2 go to you, and you get Tyler Hero, who could be like your number 2 next to Cade, which I think would fit fairly well. As your scoring option, you would have Jalen Duren as well. You'd have Azir Thompson still. So you'd keep a lot of your young guys. You would move on from beef stew, but you'd have Duran and Paul Reed. Paul Reed could finally move into your full-time backup center. Who else is in kind of that Tyler Hero range? You could make a push for Norm Powell as a free agent because you could open up cap space. That's kind of hard at this point. But I think there is a path for you to make cap space and still have Jalen Duran's cap hold. But it's tricky. It's a tricky navigation, so I don't think you would necessarily want to do a free agent sign in Norm Powell. It would probably have to be a sign and trade with Miami, sorry. But maybe you send them like Marcus Sasser, who's a nice salary for Miami given their situation, and they probably can't afford Norm Powell. You probably would have to include more salary than that, so maybe you send Karis LeVert, you dump him to a third team, a Chicago, a Memphis, something like that. You give Miami a second, and that team that you're dumping LeVert to a second. Then you're bringing in Norm Powell, similar situation as Tyler Hero, but you get to keep Beef Stew in that situation. You could also go with a lesser route and try to just get like a Colin Sexton for the mid-level. Other big trades, you could go after Trey Murphy. I think that's a decent fish for them to go after. You could go after, maybe Sabonis would work on this team if you have Duran and Sabonis. That's a little clunky, but you could piece the money together. And you could have Cade, Dennis Jenkins, Toby, Sabonis, Duran. That could be an interesting scenario. I don't think the Clippers are in the business of trading Kawhi. Kawhi, I thought, made a lot of sense for Detroit. But I think Detroit will kind of just keep the path they're going where they dip their toe, but they don't really go all in on any player. I think that's probably the right move. I think Tyler Hero makes perfect sense for them, which is why that rumor, I think, makes a lot of sense. All right, so that is all 30 teams. I could pull that list up that I just closed just to double, triple check that. Okay, yeah, so I think that's all 30 teams. So then we're talking about the trades. We talked about Giannis a bit, so I don't think we need to go back to Giannis. The other thing that happened is Trae Young got a full max from the Wizards, which stunned me. I was trying to rationalize it in the Discord, but I just didn't think there really was a rationalization of it. Trae Young got a full max after being salary dumped. The Wizards aren't going to attract free agents. I think Trae Young kind of expertly played them on that. The Wizards are kind of in a position where it's okay. It's not really going to hurt them, but it probably prevents them from extending Anthony Davis, which, again, probably not a terrible thing, but you're 2 years away from having to extend Alex Sarr. And I don't think you would want to be in a world where Davis, Trae Young, and Sarr are all on maxes as the Wizards. That's a big gamble to take at this point in your stage when you haven't made the playoffs or done anything with this roster. So yeah, I just think it's hard to justify. Trae Young's still young. He's not 30 yet. I think he's 27. He made the Eastern Conference Finals that one year, but that was the year Ben Simmons blew up his career, so it has a big asterisk on it. Can't be your best player. Probably can't be your second best player, so then why are you paying him a max? I sort of get it for Washington, but not really. The other trade that happened is the Timberwolves salary dump Julius Randle. I don't think a salary dump fully explains it because there's a lot of moving pieces in that. So one of the parts is I think the Timberwolves paid to trade back in that scenario. So the 28th pick, first round picks all have kind of guaranteed salaries. The 28th pick, I think, is 2.8 million, just shy of 3 million. And then any pick in the second round, you can sign for the veteran minimum, essentially, right? So the 33rd pick is the third pick in the second round. The Timberwolves could sign that guy to a rookie minimum contract, which would start at 1.3 million. So 50% of the contract for essentially the same quality of rookie. So a move like that makes sense for a team that's going to flirt with the aprons, flirt with being hard capped. Doesn't make sense for a team ducking the tax, right? And the other part of this trade is Brooklyn and Chicago kind of have inverted roles in the trade where Brooklyn didn't absorb Julius Randle into cap space. They traded Nick Claxton, which is legal as an over the cap trade. And then the Chicago Bulls absorbed Claxton into their cap space, essentially for nothing. They gave up their worst player on a non-guaranteed contract to the Timberwolves, just so every team gets a piece. The Timberwolves will just waive him. It costs them nothing. And so the Bulls essentially just absorb Nick Claxton's $23 million. Brooklyn doesn't use their cap space to get Julius Randle, and they trade up 5 spots from 33 to 28. Because Chicago is using their cap space, this trade can't become official until July 6th, which is about 2 weeks from now. If it goes official, the Timberwolves get a $33 million trade exception. But you have from now until July 6th to expand that trade, meaning that, like, if the Timberwolves were to get, name a player, John Morant, they could just lump that into this trade, make it a 4-team trade, and then you're using that Julius Randle contract to get John Morant. You'd have to send out additional money to make the money work for the Timberwolves. So instead of John Morant, let's say it's DeJounte Murray, and the Pelicans just won off DeJounte Murray, and the Timberwolves won him. They could either use that trade exception because DeJounte Murray makes slightly less than Julius Randle, so he's not the perfect example, or they could expand it to a 4-team trade where you just take DeJounte Murray on in that trade, and then in that instance, the Pelicans would get the trade exemption because they're not taking a player back. Who is a player that makes slightly more than Julius Randle? Or you could do 2 players, like you could do PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, which wouldn't fit into the trade exception, but if it's just a trade straight up, the Timberwolves could absorb that because it's only a couple million more. You could also like sign and trade like Joe Ingles to make it dollar for dollar exactly. So I don't think this is a finalized trade. I think it is like step 1 in a bigger trade with the Timberwolves. I've talked about and tweeted about the Timberwolves. I think what they need to do for their roster is they need to turn Julius Randle into Rudy Gobert and Rudy Gobert into something. Ideally, it would be a better number 2 option for Ant, whether that's Kyrie Irving, Zion Williamson, John Morant in theory. I don't think in actuality, but someone that has a higher upside than Randle and Gobert, and then you're kind of leveraging those 2 values to also get lesser players. So you're losing 2 front court players, so you'd want a center back. Let's say it's like DeAndre Ayton, which is a body you can at least start. Big downgrade from Rudy Gobert, but you're not losing the depth. You're maybe getting, Rudy's going to the Lakers. You get DeAndre Ayton, Jared Vanderbilt, Jake LaRavia, and a pick. Right, so then you're getting 3 players for 1, and then you're trading essentially Julius Randle's salary for Zion, let's say, right? So then you have a higher upside, number 2 next to Ant and Zion. You're severely downgrading your center and your defense, going from Rudy to Gobert. But you don't just have like a black hole there where you have to start Johan Berenger. You have another player And you have 2 weeks to figure that out. And even if you can't figure it out in those 2 weeks, you have the trade exception. So you have a $33 million trade exception in Julius Randle. You have a 10.8 trade exception in Mike Conley. And as a team under the tax, under the first apron, you also have the full mid-level contract. So it could be a straight salary dump where you're essentially trading Julius Randle to be able to use the middle-level exception. But you have 2 weeks to expand this trade, potentially add stuff. And the other thing, like I was saying with Brooklyn, is they're not using their cap space per se, so they could do another trade or a signing where they're using their $33 million in cap space and then do this trade, because they can do this trade, take on money after the fact, instead of taking on the salary cap. Because you can't, if you did this first, you're taking on $10 million, so your salary cap goes, or your cap space goes from 33 to 23, which means you can't sign a free agent for 33. You could cap out at 33, but if you sign that player at 33 million first, you can still do this trade. So I think there's a potential that this trade isn't even finalized on the 6th, that it might float further into the offseason than the first day. And then, of course, we talked about Giannis a bit in a video or two ago. So I don't think we need to really touch on that more. Ayo Dosunmu got 5 years from the Timberwolves. I think it's probably fair value, even though it's more than I expected him to get. We touched on Aaron Wiggins getting traded to Atlanta, so I think we've covered everything. So I think we're finally done with the NBA offseason, done doing NBA videos here for a while. If I get some inspiration in an offseason move, that's something that shocks me, maybe we'll do a video. But I think next videos on this channel will probably do some sort of Kobe World preview. There's a July 2nd Corrigan, I believe, which would essentially finalize the card. So maybe we'll do a preview then. And then I want to do a sumo wrestling video for the July Bash show. I've been eyeballing that, kind of keeping that in the back of my mind. So pivoting away from a pro wrestling channel, I might be done with pro wrestling. I'm kind of giving Ryo Saito the last chance to make Kobe World good, or I'm just done with pro wrestling altogether. But this won't stop being a wrestling channel. It might just become a sumo wrestling channel. So we'll see how Kobe World goes. We'll see how the July Bash show goes. We'll see how the NBA offseason goes. Thanks for coming on the ride here, everyone. There's probably like 4 or 5 hours of videos altogether, or I'm just winging it. So if you listen to all these, I appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.